Rare Gem Productions proudly presents Entrepreneurially Thinking. Entrepreneurially Thinking is a presentation of BioSTL and CET, the Center for Emerging Technologies, changing the way you view new ventures and activating your entrepreneurial mindset, empowering you to create new pathways for business success in the St. Louis marketplace and beyond. Here's your hosts, Cheryl and Christy. Now let's get thinking entrepreneurially.
Welcome back to the Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast. I'm Christy Maxfield, and Cheryl Watkins-Moore is out on assignment. No, she's actually, as you guys know, Cheryl has been working on a new medical cannabis company, Real Cannabis, with her partner, Derek Mays, who is on our episode 10.5, and everything is in super high gear for them. And so we've decided that when duty calls and she needs to be away, the show must go on. So occasionally you'll hear me doing a solo show and holding down the fort while she's out being entrepreneurial. This is my first time doing that, and so I'm excited that you'll be joining me for a conversation with Jeremy Goss. We are supporting Cheryl in spirit as she is out in the world creating a new company and a new entrepreneurial opportunity. And we hope we'll continue to inspire you all to start your new opportunities out in the field as well. Thanks to our sponsors, CET and BioSTL, we're able to bring you new episodes every week. We're also able to help you stay up to date on all the activities and events in our community, including the Vision Conference, which just wrapped up last week. Thanks to everybody who came out. We were delighted to have you with us. As I mentioned, I'm actually taking a call with an entrepreneur who got his start here in St. Louis, but is now doing a medical residency in Yale. We're talking with Jeremy Goss, a social entrepreneur who shared how he's launched LinkMarket in North St. Louis. Today, we're going to be talking with Jeremy about what it meant to create a new solution to a really complex problem, food deserts, and what they mean to our community, but also to see that idea and approach to innovation change over time and evolve as he learned how to be an entrepreneur and what it means to create change in communities. It's going to be a great story, so as Cheryl always says, stay listening.
BioSTL is a proud founding sponsor of the Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast. We want you to know about all the great things they are up to, including the BioSTL STEM Entrepreneur Inclusion Initiative and Fundamentals Program for early stage would-be entrepreneurs in the life sciences in St. Louis. You can learn more about all of BioSTL's programs by visiting biostl.org. And for your renewed and continuing support, BioSTL, we say thank you.
Purpose First Advisors is proud to support the Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast. Purpose First works with entrepreneurs and the organizations that support them to accelerate business formation, scaling, and transformational growth. For more information about how to work with Purpose First Advisors on business model validation, financial modeling, core messaging, or other growth and profitability strategies, visit purposefirstadvisors.com.
I am Shay Gillespie. I am the owner of Color Coded Kids. And what entrepreneurially thinking means being passionate about something, stepping outside of yourself and thinking outside the box and going forward.
Joining us today is Dr. Jeremy Goss, founder, chairman, and CEO of the LinkMarket. Jeremy is an advocate for low-income communities on issues related to food justice, hunger, and health. And upon graduating from St. Louis University School of Medicine, his frustration with food deserts into a game-changing idea and a life-saving solution for members of our community right here in St. Louis. Jeremy, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
LinkMarket, we're going to talk all about that. But before that, a little backstory. So St. Louis University, are you a St. Louis native?
No, I'm actually from Houston, Texas, and I came to St. Louis for medical school.
Awesome. I'm a transplant from New Jersey, so we love the different ways that folks make it to this fine city. But it sounds like you fell in love with St. Louis while you were here. What was it like to go to school here and learn more about the community?
You're absolutely right. So I did fall in love with St. Louis. It's actually become more like a second home to me. So I interviewed at St. Louis University, and when I did, I talked about wanting to help underserved people. I'm both Black and Hispanic. I speak Spanish, and at the time, I thought that some of the most vulnerable populations of folks who desperately needed better access to healthcare and other resources were in South America and Central America and some of these other hard-hit places that we know all too well. But the dean at SLU reminded me that there are a whole host of people who live in St. Louis, of all places, who got worsening healthcare outcomes, who have unmet needs in a number of different resource areas. And he really challenged me. He probably did what most people shouldn't do when they're trying to encourage you to move to a city. He talked about the poverty, the inequality, the racism, the divide.
The truth?
Yeah, the truth, right? But it was exactly what I needed to hear. But you can imagine how concerned my parents were when I called them after the interview and I said, hey, there's a lot of crime and poverty here. I think this is the perfect place.
What every parent wants to hear. Yes.
Exactly. But take into account, I was going to medical school. What better place to learn the art and the science of healing than in a city that's hurting?
Absolutely.
And so for me, it was the exact right place to be. But I felt challenged. I felt provoked to come to St. Louis, and I had a little bit of chip on my shoulder because I'd promised that dean that I was going to do something in the community. At that point, I didn't know what it was going to be, but I was more than willing to learn as much as I could about the city and its challenges and find a way that I could address any one of the issues facing the city.
Wow. Well, medical school is pretty all-consuming from what I hear. I've had a chance to work with MedLaunch and Sling Health, two entrepreneurial organizations out of SLU and WashU here. And so how did you find time to explore the issues facing St. Louis? As you said, they're pretty significant, but then not only just explore them, but turn that inquiry into action.
Well, it wasn't hard. I was seeing this from a number of different angles. As a person who now lived in the city, I was seeing so many folks struggle to get their groceries on and off a bus, who were walking to grocery stores in other areas because they had limited resources. They didn't have reliable transportation. And then also seeing patients who had worsening diabetes and heart disease, who were having amputations related to diabetes because through no fault of their own, they were born into poverty. They lived in areas that didn't have grocery stores. And so try as they might to eat healthily or to exercise, they don't have disposable income. They don't have disposable time. So healthy food is often the most expensive stuff at the grocery store. And if you live in one of these economically disadvantaged areas, you don't have a grocery store. So all I had to do was just open my eyes to what's been so true for so many people for so long. I think it was to my advantage that I was coming from a different city. That's not to say that Houston doesn't have some of the same issues. It's just to say that I was more cognizant of what was going on in St. Louis because I was seeing it for the first time.
Sure.
And to that point about medical school, so look, medical school was challenging, but you make time for the things that are important. And I managed to try to maximize efficiency. So before and sometimes during classes would be learning as much as I could about the statistics around food justice, hunger, and health challenges in St. Louis. Honestly, it was one of those great issues that kept me up at night when I probably should have been eating or sleeping. But I think when you find something that frustrates you, and for me it was food deserts and hunger, then you owe it to yourself to figure out why. And that whole first year, trying to educate myself about how complex this issue was and what was being done on this issue in the way of food banks and food distribution and grocery stores, just to understand more about the many facets of this issue. And then I felt compelled to do something about it. At one point, mentors of mine in St. Louis had encouraged me just to volunteer at a food bank or one of those locations. But ultimately, something in my body just didn't feel right about those opportunities. I think those are important resources that folks desperately need. They're a stopgap measure, and that some innovation and creativity could be applied to this complex issue. So to the extent that I could, I put together a plan to get groceries to more people, and that did not include a brick and mortar. That was too cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
So I thought, if you've got all this great food growing in the Missouri and Illinois region, and lots of folks who need it, there's got to be some way to connect them. And maybe serendipity, or maybe at that point a bus is driving past me in the moment. I can't quite remember, but I thought, well, that makes sense. If we were to get a mobile market that could go to many different locations, that it wasn't bound by any physical boundaries, that it could travel directly to the folks that need it. And 40-foot bus is the perfect amount of space if you only carry healthy foods, so things, fruits, vegetables, occasionally meat, dairy, and the staple goods, then it's the perfect vessel, perfect vehicle.
Wow. So inspiration actually drove by you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, thankfully you weren't hit by it, because that alternative would have been really unfortunate.
Absolutely.
One of the comments you made, that through no fault of their own, I wonder, in your experience as a medical student, were you finding that in the classroom and in your clinical experiences that idea of no fault of their own was a way that other physicians were approaching problems of poverty and how they intersected with the problems of health and wellness? Or is that really something that you were able to cultivate on your own? Because it sounds to me like that isn't necessarily the default position of all practitioners.
You're right. So it wasn't a belief that was all too commonly held among the physicians. And so I had the advantage of seeing patients, but then also stepping into the doctor's rooms in the back where we get to chat about patients.
Sure.
And I realized that, unfortunately, some of our perspectives are very narrow and fixed. And that because we don't live these experiences, because we've never been faced with the same challenges, it's hard for us to think about how complex it would be for you to be a parent and to try to get groceries for your kids if you don't have reliable transportation. And if you're using public transportation, how could you possibly get a family of four's groceries once a week on and off the bus, on top of all the many other things that you're faced and challenged with? And if your income is fixed, then you have to use government resources to try to help close the gap, but you're chastised when you're at the grocery store, or the narrative in the press and among some groups of folks is that you should be demonized, you should be vilified for using and making best use of a resource that's available to you. It's incredibly challenging.
Oh my, yes.
So unfortunately, it wasn't a common perspective that folks could immediately understand in the physician world, but thankfully there were a lot of standout physicians who immediately got it. And so those were some of the folks that I look to as mentors to figure out what could be done from a healthcare standpoint, from a public health standpoint, to help inform the work that I did, so that I had a gauge by which to determine whether I was actually going to be able to help folks.
Mm. And you talked a lot about researching this really complex issue and looking at the opportunities to volunteer and saying, you know, there's something important but perhaps insufficient about those opportunities. Were you at that point thinking of yourself in terms of entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, or just in terms of, I think I can make a bigger impact than what the current circumstances are providing for me?
Yeah, I accidentally became an entrepreneur. I never set out to be one. It was just that I was so frustrated at what I was seeing, what I was researching. Again, it kept me up at night.
Mm-hmm.
I started to go to a couple of different forums and to interact with folks who were living this experience. And the more I learned about it, the more challenged that I felt to do something about it. I didn't know that it was going to ultimately be me to start an organization. Again, I reached out to some of those physicians as mentors to say, hey, I've got this passion that's growing, and I don't know what to do with this energy or these thoughts. And I want to turn them into something productive. And for most, the advice was, oh, you should volunteer at an organization. I was like, well, I think that's helpful, and I want to encourage as many people to do that as possible. But there's something specific in my head that I think might work, and I think is worth the time, the effort to do. Some people immediately got it, taking a bus, turning it into a grocery store. They love that idea. Other people were scratching their head. But ultimately, I got enough encouragement from folks who understood where I was coming from that I felt compelled to move forward.
So did you move forward through the university's entrepreneurial center and the resources available for students? Or how did you start to take that idea that made some folks shake their heads and other folks nod in agreement and start to turn it into something that was at least something you prototype? Like, can we actually put fresh food on a bus and get it out to people? How did you take that next step?
Well, I didn't formally work with the university to actualize the idea. Instead, I again, sought out those mentors who were mentoring me in other facets of my life as it relates to me being in the position, and ran the idea by them. And these are people who I trust and whose opinions I value. And I got enough encouragement, again, to move forward. But starting out with no business background, so probably no business starting a business, or at least that's what I thought. I didn't know where to begin. So again, I educated myself as much as I could. I tried to talk with as many people who were living this experience and ran the idea by them first. To say, hey, would something like this work? I think one of the challenges in having ideas to help other people is that too often we don't stop to ask them if this kooky idea is actually going to make a difference for them, or if it just sounds good. Yeah. But thankfully, the idea met a very warm reception with folks in the neighborhoods that were experiencing this challenge. And once I put the idea out there, so many of them had so much positive feedback to suggest that this could work, and you need to go to this neighborhood and this neighborhood and this neighborhood, and it needs to look like this, and it needs to feel like this, and you need to sell these things, and the prices better be right. And so once we got the idea in front of those folks, got a lot of the positive feedback that we were going to be doing the right thing, and that this was going to somehow work.
That's fantastic. Well, we're going to come right back, talk about what it really is to co-design a solution for a community and what the LinkMarket looks like and what it's doing now for St. Louisans in just a second.
CET, the Center for Emerging Technologies, is a proud founding sponsor of the Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast. We want you to know about all the great resources they provide, including the Square One Ignite and Bootcamp programs, as well as the online startup toolkit. The toolkit has videos, articles, and other materials to help you build your business. For more information about CET's programs, visit CETSTL.com. And for your renewed and continued support, CET, we say thank you.
Darcella Craven, the Veterans Business Resource Center, Chief Fear Conqueror. What does entrepreneurial thinking mean to me? It's about thinking differently. It's about being afraid and being okay with being afraid. It's about failing fast and as often as you can so you can get to the win. And it's about opening up and asking for help.
So we're back talking with Jeremy about his experience as an accidental entrepreneur. And Jeremy, you were sharing with us that the Metro Market, the first iteration of your vision of what could be offered to communities in food deserts to help them increase their access to fresh, healthy foods, that was really co-designed with a lot of input from the community. And you had a team that you worked on with that. That was originally called the Metro Market, correct?
Yeah, that was the first iteration of the work that I was doing in this space.
And so that itself was literally a bus that you were able to turn into a healthy store and take where it needed to go.
Exactly.
And how did that evolve over time?
Well, I developed a relationship with Metro, the Transit Authority in St. Louis. Essentially, I, on a whim, randomly emailed one of the vice presidents at Metro because I was working with my founding team, and we had some differences about what the vehicle would look like, whether it be a bus or a truck and trailer, but they made the mistake of making me president. And I felt emboldened to this idea forward because in my head, it only made sense as a bus.
Right.
And when so many doors were being closed to us from grants that said we were too early or other resource partners that were just uninterested because they couldn't see the vision, out of desperation, I reached out to Metro and said that they had to give me a bus because I wanted to turn it into a grocery store and help so many people. And for some reason, that vice president not only read the email, but was encouraged by it, invited me in for a one-on-one meeting. I gave probably what was the worst presentation of my professional career, and that includes both my medical presentations and all my entrepreneurial presentations. But he saw the vision. That very last slide was a rendering of what was possible. I convinced one of my friends who was an architect, grad student at WashU, to craft up something the night before. And I knew that it had made an impact with Metro because the entire presentation, the guy was leaning back in his chair, but just then, on that last slide, he adjusted and leaned in and adjusted his glasses. And yeah, I think I got him. So he agreed to give me the bus, and then I texted my two colleagues and said, "Hey, I think we have to do this now because I just convinced Metro to give us a bus."
He leaned in, and we got the resource we needed, so it's a go.
Exactly. But we worked tirelessly to put it together, to strip the seats and the railings in their place, install shelving and refrigeration, and it was one of the highlights of my young adult life at that point. I think I was 24, going on 25, and I was so dedicated to this that I actually took a year off in medical school between my third and fourth year to see it all the way through.
Wow.
It was the hardest business negotiation to date, to negotiate with my parents what this would look like and how it would go, me taking a year off of medical school. But thankfully, they agreed to let me do it.
That's great. Yeah, we talk a lot about how we're coached, whether we are, 20 years old or 50 years old or 70 years old. We've been told, go get a good education, go get a good job. And entrepreneurship, with the inherent risk and the lack of infrastructure, typically is not seen as one of those pathways to security, prosperity, success. And so I can imagine how tough it was to negotiate with mom and dad.
It was incredibly difficult, but they realized that I'm stubborn and that there was no way around it. And so they said, "Hey, we'll give you a year to figure this out, and we think this is good and great, but you've got to focus on finishing medical school. That's what you're in St. Louis for." So the compromise was that by day I would do entrepreneurial things, but by night I was actually a research fellow in the Department of Plastic Surgery at St. Louis University. I was actually their first research fellow. I convinced them to take me on as a sort of a part-time job. It gave me the flexibility to do business meetings and presentations, and but by night I was going through patient charts, trying to make new discoveries as it related to cleft lips and cleft palate surgeries.
Wow.
So it worked out in the end.
It sounds like negotiation is one of your core skill sets. I don't know if you knew that going into medical school or not, but definitely emerged along the way.
Yeah, it's something that I've become better and better at. But honestly, I think the easiest part of this is to help people visualize what's possible when you take ingenuity and creativity and apply it to something as complex as hunger and food insecurity. I think when you give them a story and you give them an idea from the very beginning, they want to take this ride with you, so to speak. And so after I secured the bus, it was so much easier to enter into that next business meeting. It just sort of felt inevitable, and folks wanted to sign on to help. So things ended up working out well. But one of the challenges in being a new entrepreneur with no business background was in assembling that very first founding team. We had something that united us. We wanted to make a big difference for lots of folks, but we weren't friends going into it, and I think that was important. We had some differences of opinion, and then we ended up hiring staff that aligned more with one cohort's thoughts and visions and ideas, and it didn't necessarily mesh with the entire mission and vision. And then ultimately there were some leadership challenges with staff. So the founders know the mission and vision better than anyone else. They're going to work better than anyone else. But, sometimes it's the challenges that you face are finding the right folks to see your vision through. Because ultimately I had to go back to medical school. I had to finish. And so we hired on some staff, and things didn't align well. And if I'm honest, as the only black guy on the team, there were times when things got racial.
Interesting.
And they got a little racist. And it hurt quite a bit to be on the receiving end of some of those things. And ultimately, I thought and decided that I wasn't recognizing what we were doing as something positive as it related to the team dynamic. And so for my own best interest, stepped away. And I thought, that's a challenge. That's letting go of something that I started.
Sure.
Admitting defeat was heartbreaking. I was, again, 24 going on 25. It was one of the most challenging things that had happened in my life at that point.
Yeah. And as you said, this was the thing keeping you up at night and the thing you felt like you owed it to yourself to figure out and try and experiment. And it sounds like it wasn't necessarily the lack of business experience per se, but like you said, when you share your dream and you enlist other people to be a part of it, there's dynamics there that can overshadow the vision and the mission.
Exactly. And I stopped recognizing the company that I'd built, and it was incredibly difficult because at that point I had just graduated from medical school and had been accepted to a pretty prestigious research fellowship at Boston Children's Hospital in the Department of Pediatric Plastic Surgery.
Wow.
And it's a Harvard-affiliated campus, and so I was going to go do research at Harvard, and I was moving from St. Louis to Boston, but I was still overseeing the day-to-day operations of the company. There were obviously some things that I just wasn't able to do or to act on, and so it was important to take on staff. But when those staff don't share every facet of the vision and unfortunately have some perspectives that are abhorrent that you find out later, it becomes a challenge to hold on to something. But that's a lesson there too, because it was one of the hardest lessons that I learned in all of this was that it's okay to fail. That's actually an important part of the process. And it made me that better of a business person, made me that better of an entrepreneur, because I was able to recognize that something wasn't working.
Yeah.
I was able to walk away from that. But I did that not knowing what would come next. I retired, so to speak, from the nonprofit world and thought, well, maybe this is a good time to take a break.
Yeah.
And I'm in Boston now, and I should dedicate my time to this research at Harvard. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Yeah, you got that Harvard thing going, so a nice fallback position.
Yeah.
But I understand doesn't necessarily ease the pain of needing to step away from this thing that you had created. That's a huge part of your identity and how you're moving through the world at that point.
My time in St. Louis was linked so much to those experiences in starting that nonprofit. I can't think back to any moment of living in St. Louis without thinking about how different my life would have been if I didn't start that first company. So I'm incredibly appreciative of that experience because it changed me as a human being. I think it made me a more thoughtful, compassionate, concerned person and of the world, and certainly influences how I see and care for patients even today. And those life lessons of meeting challenges and resistance amongst allies and how to walk through that process was important for me to learn at that point. But while I was in Boston, one of those connections that I had made through Metro reached out to me and asked me to unretire because there was an opportunity.
Well, thank goodness you were young enough to explore the unretirement option.
Yeah, I think I was only retired for like 4 months.
I've heard it doesn't set well with a lot of folks, that retirement thing is hard.
Yeah, right. So I reconnected with that person from Metro, and together we crafted a new idea that was the second iteration of the work that I was so fortunate to do while in St. Louis. And so this time, instead of taking a bus, we took shipping containers and we converted those into fixed retail grocery store kiosks, so to speak, offering the same selection of fruits, vegetables, meat, dairy, staple goods at the best possible prices that doesn't undermine the local economy, but actually supports it. And by placing them at MetroLink locations throughout the city, overcome some of those physical and transportation-based boundaries that folks in food deserts too often encounter. And so I've been doing phase two of this work since 2017.
Okay.
I found great and talented individuals with whom the vision was shared, and learning from the mistakes and the failures of phase one, vowed to do better in phase two. And this time hired folks from within the neighborhoods that we serve who knew better than I did some of the facets of this issue in which to relate to folks. Because even though I'm a minority, even though I'm a Black man, I am incredibly privileged. I had the opportunity to go to medical school. I had the audacity and the privilege to take a year off from medical school to chase a dream. And that's not an opportunity or privilege that folks who look like me have. And so I'm incredibly cognizant of the fact that I need even more folks from these communities to inform the work that we do, so that we make sure that we stay honest to that mission. So they're always challenging me to go further, to do more, keeping everything honest.
So it sounds like that part of the learning was source talent from the communities that are being served, not just in the co-creation process like you did on the front end with Metro Market, but actually in the running of the business in an employee capacity. What else did you do to sort of address that team building conundrum, right? You know, like we've all been in situations where we're thrust into working relationships with folks. We're asked to work as a team and we have to find common ground. There's also, in your situation, the situation of a lot of entrepreneurs, there's letting people into the fold as your idea and inspiration take shape. And you had already had an experience where that didn't go so well. So how are some of the ways you did troubleshoot that in part two?
Well, a lot of it had to do with the recruitment efforts. I think when the idea at the bus turned grocery store took off, there were lots of folks who were interested in leading the initiative when I had to transition back to medical school. And they had pretty good resumes. So they had backgrounds in entrepreneurship, they had backgrounds in business, and some of them even have backgrounds in agriculture.
Interesting.
One candidate had a background in both. And so on paper, they seemed like the right person. And I learned that most anybody can seem great in a 15 to 20-minute interview, but you don't know that person very well until you work with that person for a long time. But when I stepped back and started the new organization, the LinkMarket, one of the founding principles was to recruit and hire and to train folks within the neighborhoods that we serve, not just for the part-time positions working the registers, but at every step, every level of the business, up into and including the manager and the folks in community engagement, part-time and full-time folks, so that every part of what we do best represents the neighborhoods and gives folks opportunities not just for healthy food, but for job growth and education and maturation. And so I just went back to the same communities that I was serving previously and said, I want to take talented individuals who may or may not have the relevant experience, but have the drive and the hunger, so to speak, to do this work. Because I didn't have the requisite experience or background or education. I didn't then, still don't now, have an MBA.
Right.
But my passion alone was enough to carry me through. And so now I feel more able to address this issue. And so extending to a future employee that same opportunity, that you may not have the requisite education, you may not have the relevant experience yet, but you see the vision.
Yeah.
And you're teachable and coachable. And if I could do it, then maybe I can help you through that process.
That's amazing.
So I found two talented African-American women to be the left and right hand of the organization, to run the day-to-day operations, and then also to be at the forefront of community engagement. And we've been working beautifully ever since.
Because you're joining us today on the phone from Connecticut because you're doing a residency at Yale. So as CEO of LinkMarket, you've really built a team that allows you to continue to pursue your medical career and at the same time create jobs and opportunity and valuable resource to the local economy here in St. Louis.
Absolutely. I never have to worry about if things are going well, because even if I can't oversee the day-to-day as well from all that way out here in New Haven, I've got absolute trust in Serena and Resenda, who are on the ground doing the important work. They're making some day-to-day decisions with my full faith and confidence, and they're doing an outstanding job. I have the opportunities between patients and clinics to touch bases, but honestly, I think a mark of good leadership is that you don't have to be there for things to run well, that you could walk away for a while, and when you come back, everything is still working because you found the right people, you've trained and equipped them to apply their talents, creativity to these issues, and you've given them the resources they need to be successful, so that you don't always have to be there. at first, when I was founding the LinkMarket, I would come to St. Louis maybe every other month, but I haven't been back in St. Louis since, I want to say, last November.
Wow.
And that was actually a residency interview. That wasn't necessarily a business trip.
So does that mean we get to see you back in St. Louis anytime? It sounds like some incredible talent has the risk of going to the coasts.
Well, so truth be told, I did go back to St. Louis for an interview, and I also turned it into a little bit of a business trip, so I can't help in St. Louis and check on things.
Sure.
and take Serena and Lucinda out to lunch, if only to thank them for all the hard work they continue to do, and then also to meet with some folks who have been so generous with their time and other resources to additionally make the LinkMarket as successful as it's been. So I did interview in Louis and a whole host of other places, but I absolutely fell in love with the program in plastic surgery at Yale. Some of the smartest, most talented physicians doing innovative research, but also innovative surgery. And I wanted to be just like them. And so I thought I needed to be at that program.
Well, that's exciting.
Not to say that I when I finish with my training, won't come back to St. Louis again. St. Louis is a second home for me.
Well, that's exciting to hear because it sounds like you have many more opportunities to be entrepreneurial in your future, and that identity, in addition to your role as a physician and as a healer, they're going to mesh and intersect a lot along the way. So I personally would be excited to see where that goes, and to put in a vote for some of that creativity coming back to and being part of the community here in St. Louis.
Yeah, actually, one of the other times I got to come back was in April of 2018. So April of last year, I got invited to come back and give a TEDx talk about my role in founding the first initiative and now the LinkMarket. And that was a beautiful experience because I got to spend a little bit more time in St. Louis and to go through all those neighborhoods that I was a part of helping, not only so many years ago, but even presently today. And that was so edifying because it was the helpful reminder that something that I did was making a difference in the lives of others. And so I got to give that talk, and the focus of it was not to set myself apart on a soapbox and say, hey, I'm so great and I'm doing all these things, but more it was to say that so many of the folks who live and work in St. Louis are transplants, just like I am. Mm-hmm. They come from some other city, some other state, maybe, and they're here for either an education or for a job opportunity, but they got incredible skills and they're applying them to industry. But I wonder what would happen if we took a little bit of time, talent, and financial resources and applied it to some of these complex issues, like I believe I did with food justice. Not that I got it exactly right, either the first time or now the second time, but at least we're trying. So hopefully I got to share that message and inspire some folks to work on those challenging ideas. So instead of working on another app for dating, maybe work on an app to connect parents to after-school resources.
That sounds like a great idea to me. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you making the time during your residency to have this conversation. Our listeners can find out more about LinkMarket at linkmarket.org and check out the TEDx presentation. I'm sure there's a video online that would make it easy for folks to connect with that experience as well. But thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Changing the way you view new ventures, unlocking your creativity and innovation, igniting your thinking about entrepreneurship. It's Entrepreneurially Thinking. Get connected and discover more. Visit entrepreneuriallythinking.com to listen to all your favorite episodes and learn more about our guests, hosts, and sponsors. Feeling inspired? Be sure to share your thoughts, questions, and stories in the comments section. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. The best way to show love is to share and subscribe. Let everybody know that you're entrepreneurially thinking.